My name is Lila, and the moment I discovered my mother had left me out of her will was the moment I realized love could cut deeper than any blade. I was 26, sitting in a musty lawyer's office in Savannah, where the air felt heavy with secrets and the faint scent of mildew clung to everything. My fingers gripped the arms of the chair nails pressing into the worn leather as Mr. Hargrove, a man with a voice like dry leaves, read my mother's final wishes. She'd passed 3 months earlier, her body worn thin by years of fighting cancer, and I'd thought the worst pain was behind me. But when Mr. Hargrove named my brother Marcus and my sister Sophie as the sole heirs and my name never followed, it was as if the air had been sucked from the room, leaving me gasping in a silence that screamed betrayal. Have you ever felt someone you trusted rip your heart out with a single choice? I sat there, my eyes fixed on a smudge on the lawyer's desk, a stubborn ink stain, and I waited for him to backtrack to say he'd skipped a line that my mother hadn't erased me. But he droned on, listing the house on Abercorn Street, the bank account, the pearl earrings she wore every Sunday. All of it divided between Marcus and Sophie. Marcus, my older brother 30, with his slick smile and his knack for turning every conversation to his advantage. Sophie, my younger sister 22, the fragile one, the one my mother called her sweet blessing. And me, I was Lila, the one who never quite fit the one who'd spent years chasing a place, in a family that seemed to look right through me. My heart pounded a dull thud that drowned out half of what Mr. Hargrove said. The rooms seemed to shrink, the walls too close, the light too dim. I'd been there for my mother more than anyone else. When the cancer returned, when hope gave way to hospice, I was the one who moved back to Savannah. I was the one who sat by her side, wiping her brow when the pain came in waves, reading her favorite poems by Emily Dickinson until my throat ached. Marcus would drop by, all charm and empty promises, staying just long enough to seem like he cared before rushing off to some deal. Sophie would try, but her visits ended in tears, her fragility a shield she hid behind. I didn't blame them, not entirely. We all grieved in our own ways. But I thought my mother knew me, saw me in those quiet nights when it was just us. Her hand in mine, the world outside, forgotten. When Mr. Hargrove stopped, I forced the words out, my voice, thin, barely mine. Nothing for me at all. He shifted in his seat, his eyes flickering with unease, and shook his head. I'm afraid not, Ms. Bennet. Your mother's instructions were explicit. I nodded, my body moving on its own, and I stood, my knees unsteady. Walking out into the thick Savannah heat, the sun glaring down like it was mocking me. I didn't cry, not then. I was too hollow, too stunned, like someone had stripped away everything that made me whole. I wandered to Forsyth Park, collapsing onto a bench beneath an oak tree, its branches sagging with Spanish moss. It was the park where my mother used to bring us as children, where I'd weave daisy chains, while Marcus kicked a soccer ball and Sophie giggled in her stroller. I could still hear her voice calling us to the picnic blanket, her laughter bright before life wore it down. Growing up, I'd always been the odd piece in our family puzzle. Marcus was the hero, his track medals gleaming on the shelf, his every move celebrated. Sophie was the darling, her whims indulged, her crayon scribbles framed like treasures. I was the silent one sketching in the margins, my dreams of art tucked away like secrets. My mother wasn't harsh, but her love was a rare gift given in fleeting glances. A nod at my sketches, a distracted, pretty Lila, before she turned to Sophie's ballet shoes or Marcus's latest triumph. My father was crueler. He'd call me the thinker, his voice thick with scorn, as if my love for drawing was a childish phase I'd outgrow. When he walked out for a new life in Atlanta, I was 12, and I carried the weight of his leaving, certain I'd driven him away by not being enough like Marcus or Sophie. My mother never spoke of him after, and I learned to swallow my hurt, to shrink myself so I wouldn't burden her. But when she fell ill, I thought we'd forged something new. Those hospital nights were ours, filled with her stories of old Savannah, her unfulfilled dream of running an art gallery. my own hopes of studying art history, of curating spaces where beauty could heal. She'd listen, her gaze soft, and I believed maybe she finally understood me. Now on that bench, I felt like a child who'd misread a fairy tale. I sifted through those moments searching for the lie, the instant she'd decided I was worthless. Had she ever cared, or had I been a shadow, filling space until Marcus or Sophie shone brighter? The will wasn't just about money or heirlooms, it was her last chance to say who counted, and she'd declared in ink and law that I didn't. I went to work that evening because standing still felt like drowning. I was a barista at a cozy shop on Broughton Street, where the hum of conversation and the scent of fresh coffee grounded me. My coworker Amara saw the change in me the second I walked in. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said, her voice gentle as she tamped espresso grounds. I tried to brush it off, but my hands fumbled with my apron strings, and during a quiet moment, I let it all pour out: the will, the house, Marcus and Sophie, the mother I thought I knew. Amara listened, her eyes steady, and when I was done, she didn't offer empty comforts. She pressed a mug of chamomile tea into my hands and said, "Lila, you're more than what they leave you. Don't let this define you." Her words were a lifeline, but they couldn't mend the tear inside me. I worked my shift, forcing smiles, frothing milk, wiping counters, but it was like I was outside myself, watching someone else play my part. When I got home, the apartment was still, the silence heavy. Marcus was in Miami, probably toasting his windfall. Sophie was at her place across town, likely wrapped in her boyfriend's arms, oblivious to the will's sting. I didn't reach out. I didn't want their apologies or their shock, if they'd even feel it. I sat on my bed, the same narrow one from my teenage years, and stared at the ceiling where faint outlines of old glow-in-the-dark stars lingered, their light long gone. I imagined facing my mother if she were still here, demanding to know why, what I'd lacked, what I'd failed to do. I pictured her face pale and drawn, and wondered if she'd have words to explain it. The grief surged, tangled with a fury I didn't know I could feel, a fire that burned hotter than my tears. I wanted to shout, to shatter something, to make the world feel the weight I carried. But there was no one to confront, no one to answer, just the ghost of a woman I'd loved too much. So I did the only thing left. I grabbed my sketchbook from the shelf and started to draw. I sketched the oak tree from the park, its roots clawing into the earth, its branches heavy with time. I drew until my wrist ached, until the page held a piece of my pain, and for the first time that day, I felt a flicker of control. But the wound stayed a shadow that trailed me, slipping into every quiet moment, every glimpse of my mother's handwriting on an old note, every memory of her voice. I stopped mentioning her, stopped looking at the photos on the wall. I worked, I sketched. I slept, but it was like I was drifting through a stranger's life. Have you ever been there, where the people meant to hold you up decide you're not worth it, and you're left to gather the fragments alone? That's where I was, my sketchbook open in the dark. A spark of defiance growing, a spark I couldn't yet name. The weeks after the lawyer's office were like living underwater, every movement slow, every sound muffled. I'd wake up in my tiny apartment, the walls too thin, to keep out the hum of Savannah's morning traffic, and for a moment I'd forget the will, forget the way my mother's choice had carved me out of her legacy. Then it would rush back, her silence, my name, missing the proof I'd never been enough. And I'd lie there, my breath, shallow, the ceiling above me, a map of cracks I'd memorized. The world outside kept turning, the river sparkling, the tourists laughing, but I was frozen, caught in a cycle of questions that led nowhere. Why had she left me out? Had those hospital nights when I held her hand and read her poetry meant nothing? Had I been loving a version of her that didn't exist? I couldn't bring myself to visit the house on Abercorn Street, the one now belonging to Marcus and Sophie. Just thinking about it, the porch swing where I'd read as a kid, the kitchen where my mother used to hum while cooking, made my stomach twist. It wasn't mine anymore, maybe never had been, I stayed in my apartment above the coffee shop, a small room with a sagging couch, and a view of an alley where stray cats fought at night. It was all I could afford on my barista pay, supplemented by the occasional sale of a sketch at a weekend market. I'd always told myself it was a stepping stone, that I'd have a real studio someday, a place to create, to teach, to make art a life. But now that dream felt like a cruel joke, something my mother had dismissed with her final act. Work was the only thing keeping me tethered. The coffee shop was a whirlwind of noise and warmth, the air rich with the scent of espresso and vanilla, the clatter of cups a rhythm I could lose myself in. I'd grind beans, steam milk, scribble names. On cups each task a way to quiet the ache in my chest. But the pain was stubborn, sneaking in when the shop slowed, when I'd catch my reflection in the glass door and see my mother's cheekbones, her shadow in my face. I'd turn away, force a laugh for a customer, but it was there a weight I carried like a second skin. Amara was the one who kept me from breaking. She was 30 with a smile that lit up the gloomiest shifts and a knack for knowing when you were hiding something. We'd been coworkers for years, but it was only after the will that I truly leaned on her, that I saw her as more than the woman who made the best cappuccinos. One evening, as we cleaned up after closing the shop, quiet, except for the hum of the fridge, she caught me staring at a blank page in my sketchbook, my pencil still. "You haven't drawn all day?" she said, wiping down the counter. Her voice soft but pointed. "That's not you, Lila. I didn't want to open that door." Talking about it meant feeling it, and feeling it meant facing the void my mother had left. But Amara's eyes were steady, her presence like a warm hand on my shoulder, and the words came before I could stop them. I told her about the will again, about the house I couldn't face, about Marcus and Sophie, about the way my mother's absence felt like a lie I'd believed too long. I told her about the sketches I'd been making at night. Harsh, chaotic lines that didn't look like my usual work, but felt like the only way to scream without sound. My voice cracked, and I stared at the floor at a coffee stain shaped like a crescent moon, waiting for her to say it would get better, that time would heal it. She didn't. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded flyer, its edges worn from being carried around. It was for an art workshop at a community center in the historic district, a 6-week course for local artists taught by a painter named Ms. Delgado, whose work had been in galleries from Charleston to New Orleans. "Found this at the library," Amara said, handing it to me. "It's not a big deal, but it's a start. You're too talented to let this bury you." I took the flyer, my fingers brushing the paper, and though I didn't say it, her words were a lifeline. "You're too talented." I couldn't remember the last time someone had said that, and it was like a crack in the wall I'd built, letting in a sliver of light. That night I sat on my couch, the flyer on the coffee table, its bright colors mocking the grayness inside me. I thought about my mother, about the way she'd glance at my childhood drawings, her smile thin, her attention already drifting to Marcus's track meets or Sophie's dance recitals. I thought about the hospital, about the nights I'd read to her, about the way she'd whisper, "You're a good daughter, Lila," as if those words could make up for years of distance. I wanted to hate her, to burn away the love I still felt, but all I could manage was a deep, hollow sadness, a yearning for a mother who'd never truly seen me. I looked at the flyer again, at Ms. Delgado's name, and I decided I'd go to the workshop, not for her, not for anyone, but for the part of me that was still fighting to exist. The first workshop was in a small room at the community center. The air smelling of turpentine and dust, the tables cluttered with paints and brushes. I was nervous, my sketchbook heavy in my arms, feeling like a fraud among the other artists, mostly older with stories of exhibitions and commissions they shared easily. Ms. Delgado was not what I'd pictured. She was in her late 50s with dark hair streaked with silver and a presence that filled the room without trying. She didn't start with talk of technique or perspective. Instead, she asked us to draw something we couldn't speak, something that lived in the quiet parts of us. "Art is where you tell the truth," she said, her voice like a river, steady and deep. Let it out. I drew my mother's eyes, the ones I'd looked into every night in the hospital, soft and tired but alive with something I thought was love. I drew them closing, fading into shadow, and I didn't notice the tears on my cheeks until they blurred the lines. Ms. Delgado didn't comment, but she rested a hand on my back, her touch brief but warm, like she understood. After the session, she asked me to stay, and we sat at the table, the room empty, except for us. I told her about the will, about my mother's silence, about the sketches that felt like wounds. She listened, her face still, and when I was done, she said, "You're holding a lot, Lila, but that pain, it's also your strength. Keep making art. It's how you'll find yourself." Her words echoed Amara's, but landed differently. Maybe because she was an artist, maybe because she saw something in my work. I was too broken to see. I started attending the workshop twice a week, fitting it around my coffee shop shifts. It was exhausting, my body ached, my eyes burned. But it was the first time since the will that I felt like I was more than my grief. I drew things I'd never dared, my mother's empty bed, the house on Abercorn Street, with its doors locked, my own hands cracked and reaching. Each piece was a release, a way to let the hurt breathe without letting it consume me. But the pain lingered, especially when Marcus or Sophie crossed my path. Marcus texted once suggesting we sort out the estate details, his tone dripping with a pity I didn't want. I didn't respond. Sophie called, her voice shaky, saying she hadn't known about the will, that she was sorry. But her words felt like air, weightless and fleeting. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need their regret or their explanations. I needed my mother, not the one who'd cut me out, but the one I'd believed in, the one who'd listened to my dreams in the dark. One evening after a workshop, I walked home through the Savannah squares, the air sweet with magnolias, the streetlights casting long shadows. I passed a gallery on Jones Street, its windows alive with paintings that seemed to pulse with feeling, anger, joy, sorrow. I stopped, my heart catching, and I pictured my own work there, my name on a wall, my truth laid bare. It was a reckless hope, the kind that could shatter you, but it was also a fire, a reason to keep moving. The workshop became my sanctuary, the one place where the world's sharp edges softened, even if just for a few hours. I'd walk into that cramped room at the community center, the air thick with the scent of paint and possibility, and feel my shoulders loosen, my breath come easier. It was late summer in Savannah, the kind of heat that clung to your skin. But inside that room, with its chipped tables and flickering fluorescent lights, I could forget the weight of my mother's will, the way her absence felt like a verdict on my worth. I'd sit at my easel, my fingers smudged with charcoal, and lose myself in lines and shadows, each stroke away to say what I couldn't out loud. But the hurt was still there, a quiet ache that pulsed beneath everything, waiting for a moment to pull me under. Ms. Delgado was the heart of the workshop, her presence both fierce and gentle, like a storm you trusted not to break you. She was in her late 50s, her hands stained with years of paint, her eyes carrying stories she didn't share. She'd move through the room, offering a nod here, a quiet word there, but with me, she lingered. Maybe she saw something in my sketches, the jagged lines, the fractured shapes, or maybe she just knew what it looked like to carry a wound you couldn't name. One evening, as the others packed up, she sat beside me, her silver earrings catching the light. "Your work has a voice, Lila," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "It's angry, but it's honest. Don't shy away from that." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Honest. I hadn't thought of my sketches that way. Hadn't thought of them as anything but a way to survive. I'd been drawing my mother's absence, her empty chair, her closed bedroom door, the silhouette of the house on Abercorn Street. I couldn't bring myself to visit. Each piece was raw, messy, nothing like the careful landscapes I'd done as a teenager to please my mother, to earn a smile that never lasted. I looked at Ms. Delgado, her face lined with a kind of strength I wanted, and I told her about the will, about my mother's choice, about the way it felt like I'd been erased. I told her about Marcus and Sophie, how their silence hurt almost as much as my mother's, how I was afraid I'd never climb out of this hole. She listened, her hands still, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she didn't offer pity or platitudes. Instead, she handed me a small sketchbook, its cover worn but sturdy. "This is for you," she said. "Not for the workshop, not for anyone else. Draw what you feel every day, even if it's just a line. You're not just grieving Lila, you're rebuilding." I took the sketchbook, my fingers tracing its edges, and something shifted inside me, small but real, like a seed breaking through soil. I didn't know how to thank her, so I just nodded, clutching the book like it was a lifeline. I started drawing in it that night, sitting on my apartment's sagging couch, the hum of the city filtering through the open window. I drew my mother's hands, not as they'd been in the hospital, frail and fading, but as I remembered them from childhood, strong stirring soup, braiding my hair before school. I drew them letting go, slipping away, and I cried, not the quiet tears I'd been swallowing, but the kind that shake you, that leave you empty, but somehow lighter. The sketchbook became my confessional, a place to pour the anger, the sadness, the questions I'd never get to ask. I drew every night, sometimes just a scribble, sometimes pages of shadows and light, and slowly I felt myself coming back, piece by piece. Work was still my anchor, the coffee shop a chaos I could control. I'd throw myself into the morning rush, the hiss of the espresso machine, drowning out my thoughts, the chatter of customers, a reminder that life went on. Amara was there always, her laughter a tether when I started to drift. She'd noticed the change in me, the way I'd bring the sketchbook to work, stealing moments to draw between orders. "You're looking more like you," she said one afternoon, as we restocked the pastry case, her smile warm. I didn't know what me was anymore, but her words made me want to find out. I was still avoiding Marcus and Sophie. Marcus had texted again, asking if I wanted to go over the paperwork for the house. His tone clipped like he was doing me a favor. I deleted it. Sophie left a voicemail, her voice soft and tearful, saying she didn't understand why Mom did it, that she wanted to talk. I listened to it 3 times, my finger hovering over the call button, but I couldn't press it. Their words, their guilt, felt like too little too late. I didn't want to be their absolution. I wanted to be seen, not as the sister they'd overlooked, but as Lila, the woman who was still here, still fighting. The workshop was changing me, though I didn't see it at first. Ms. Delgado started giving me harder assignments, pushing me to draw beyond my pain. One week, she asked us to create something that scared us, something we wanted, but didn't believe we could have. I drew a gallery, its walls lined with my work people, standing in front of my sketches, their faces alive with feeling. It was a reckless dream, one I'd barely let myself think, but putting it on paper made it real, made me want it in a way I hadn't before. Ms. Delgado looked at it, her lips curving into a rare smile. "This is you, Lila," she said, "not the hurt. This." Her belief in me was a gift I didn't know how to accept. I'd spent so long feeling invisible, first in my family, then in my mother's will, that being seen felt like standing in sunlight after years in the dark. I started taking risks in the workshop, experimenting with color, with bold lines, with pieces that weren't just about loss, but about hope, about claiming space. The other artists noticed offering quiet compliments, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like my voice mattered. But the pain was stubborn, flaring up when I least expected it. One evening, I was walking home from the workshop, the air heavy with the promise of rain, when I passed the house on Abercorn Street. I hadn't meant to, it was a detour I usually avoided, but there it was, its windows glowing, Sophie's car in the driveway. I stopped, my heart pounding, and for a moment I saw my mother in the doorway, waving me inside her smile, the one I'd chased my whole life. The image shattered, and I was alone, staring at a house that wasn't mine, a life I'd been written out of. I turned away, my sketchbook heavy in my bag, and walked faster, the first drops of rain cold against my skin. Back in my apartment, I opened the sketchbook Ms. Delgado had given me and drew the house not as it was, but as I felt it. Its doors barred its windows, blind a fortress I couldn't enter. I drew until my hand cramped, until the page was heavy with ink, and I felt the anger ebb replaced by something quieter, something like resolve. I was starting to understand what Ms. Delgado meant about rebuilding. It wasn't about forgetting the hurt or pretending it didn't exist. It was about making something new, something that was mine. The workshop was ending soon, and Ms. Delgado announced a small exhibition for the participants, a chance to show our work to the community. The idea terrified me. My sketches were so personal, so raw, but it also thrilled me a chance to be seen on my own terms. I started working on a piece for the show, something bigger than anything I'd done. A canvas that held my mother, my pain, and the woman I was becoming. It was slow, painstaking work, each stroke a choice, to keep going, to believe I was worth it. Amara noticed the shift, too. "You're glowing," she said one morning, as we opened the shop, the dawn light spilling through the windows. I laughed, but I felt it a warmth I hadn't known in months, a sense that I was more than my mother's rejection. I was still angry, still broken in places, but I was also something else, something I was just beginning to name. The exhibition was a week away, and I was a mess of nerves and hope, my apartment a chaos of paint tubes and crumpled sketches. I'd been working on my piece for the community center show, a canvas larger than anything I'd attempted its surface, a map of everything I'd lost and everything I was claiming. It was my mother's face, but not as I'd known her in the hospital, worn and distant. It was her as I'd imagined her in her youth, fierce and dreaming blended with my own features, our eyes merging, our shadows intertwined. It was pain and love and defiance, and every stroke felt like a declaration. I was here, I was enough, and no will could take that from me. I'd stay up late the Savannah night, humming outside my window, my hands stained with acrylic, my heart racing with a feeling I hadn't known in months' purpose. Ms. Delgado had been pushing me harder, her feedback sharp but kind, like she was sculpting something out of me I couldn't yet see. "You're not hiding anymore," she said one evening as we cleaned brushes after a workshop session. The room quiet, except for the drip of water in the sink. "This piece, it's you, stepping into your power." Her words made me flush, a mix of pride and fear, because power felt like a word for other people. For Marcus with his deals, for Sophie with her charm. But when I looked at my canvas, at the bold lines and fearless colors, I believed her just a little. I was changing not just in the workshop, but in the way I carried myself, the way I met my own eyes in the mirror. Work at the coffee shop was still my lifeline, but even there things were shifting. Amara had started calling me the artist, half teasing, half serious, and the regulars began to notice the sketchbook I kept behind the counter, asking to see my drawings. One morning, a woman named Claire, a gallery assistant who came in for oat milk lattes, caught me sketching during a lull. It was a quick study of the shop's window, the light filtering through the Spanish moss outside, and she leaned over, her eyes narrowing. "This is good, Lila," she said, her voice matter of fact. "You ever think about showing your work?" I mumbled something about the community exhibition, and she handed me her card, telling me to send her photos of my pieces. I tucked it in my pocket, my hands shaking, not quite believing it was real. The card stayed on my coffee table for days, a small, terrifying promise. I'd never thought of my art as something for galleries, not seriously. It was mine, a way to survive, not something to be judged or sold. But Claire's words and Ms. Delgado's and even Amara's were building something in me, a belief that maybe I could be more than a barista, more than the girl my mother hadn't seen. I started taking photos of my work, the sketches from Ms. Delgado's sketchbook, the canvas for the exhibition, even older pieces I'd hidden away. I sent them to Claire, my heart pounding as I hit send, and then I waited, trying not to hope too much, trying not to feel like I was setting myself up to fall. The day of the exhibition came and I was a wreck. The community center had transformed the workshop room into a gallery. The walls lined with our pieces, the air buzzing with nervous energy. My canvas stood near the center, its colors bold under the lights, and I couldn't look at it without feeling exposed, like I'd hung my soul for everyone to see. Ms. Delgado had invited local artists and a few gallery owners, and the room filled with people I didn't know their voices. A low hum as they moved from piece to piece. I stood in a corner, my dress borrowed from Amara, my hands twisting together, watching strangers pause. In front of my work, their faces unreadable. Claire was there, her presence a jolt I hadn't expected. She spent a long time looking at my canvas, her head tilted, and then she found me, her smile small but genuine. "This is powerful, Lila," she said. "We're curating a group show at the gallery next month, Emerging Artists. I'd like you to submit this piece, maybe a few others. No promises, but it's a start." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, and when she walked away, I felt like I was floating, like the ground was no longer solid beneath me. A start. It was more than I dared to dream, and it was mine, not my mother's, not my siblings', but mine. Amara came to the exhibition, her laughter cutting through my nerves as she pulled me into a hug. "Look at you, a real artist," she said, her eyes shining. Ms. Delgado was there too. Her nod of approval, worth more than any gallery offer. I moved through the evening in a daze, talking to strangers who asked about my work, their questions forcing me to articulate what I'd poured into the canvas. I talked about loss, about finding yourself in the ruins, about art, as a way to claim your place. Each word felt like a step, a way of making myself real, and by the end of the night I was exhausted, but alive, my heart, full in a way it hadn't been since before the will. The next day I got an email from Claire confirming the group show and asking for 3 pieces. I read it twice, then called Amara, my voice shaking as I told her. She screamed through the phone, demanding we celebrate, and we did with cheap wine and pizza. In my apartment, the sketchbook open on the table, its pages a testament to how far I'd come. I was still working at the coffee shop, still living in my cramped apartment, but I felt different, like I was standing taller, like the world was starting to see me, the way Ms. Delgado did, the way I was beginning to see myself. I didn't tell Marcus or Sophie about the exhibition or the gallery show. I didn't want their congratulations, didn't want to wonder if they meant it. Marcus had emailed again, something about the house's appraisal, and I deleted it without reading. Sophie sent a text, a vague apology about everything, but I didn't reply. Their voices felt like echoes of a life I was leaving behind. A life where I was the invisible sister, the one who didn't matter. I was building something new, something that didn't depend on their approval or my mother's love. Ms. Delgado started mentoring me outside the workshop, inviting me to her studio. A sunlit space filled with canvases that felt like they could speak. She taught me about composition, about color theory, but more than that, she taught me about courage, about owning my story. "You're not just painting your pain," she said one afternoon as we worked side by side. "You're painting your strength. That's what makes your work sing." I listened, my brush moving, and I felt its strength, not as something loud or certain, but as a quiet, steady thing growing inside me like a tree. I started preparing for the group show, choosing pieces that told my story. The canvas from the exhibition, a sketch of my mother's hands. From the sketchbook, a new painting of the Savannah River, its waters, reflecting a sky I was beginning to believe in. Each piece was a risk. A piece of me laid bare, but I wasn't afraid anymore, or at least not as much. I was still angry, still hurt, but those feelings were fuel, now pushing me to create, to claim space to be seen. One night, as I worked on the river painting, the radio playing softly in the background, I realized I wasn't thinking about my mother's will. For the first time in months, I was thinking about the future, about the gallery show, about what I could create next, about who I could become. It wasn't that the pain was gone. It was still there, a scar I'd always carry. But it wasn't all of me anymore. I was more than my mother's silence, more than my siblings' indifference, more than the girl who'd sat on a park bench and thought she'd never climb out. Have you ever felt that shift when you realize you're not just surviving, but building, growing, becoming? That's where I was, my canvas glowing under the lamplight, my heart beating with a song I was finally learning to sing. The gallery show was 3 weeks away, and my life felt like it was splitting open, spilling light I hadn't known was there. I'd wake up before dawn, the Savannah air still cool, and paint in my apartment. The floor littered with sketches and empty coffee mugs. The pieces for the show were coming together, a triptych of my mother's hands, the Savannah River, and the canvas from the community exhibition, each one a chapter of my heart. I was pouring everything into them, not just pain, but hope, not just loss, but the woman I was becoming. My hands moved with a certainty I didn't recognize, each brushstroke a claim, a refusal to be invisible. I was still a barista, still scraping by, but I felt bigger, like I was stepping into a version of myself I'd only dreamed of. Ms. Delgado was my guide, her studio a refuge where I spent more and more time. She'd invited me to work there, clearing a corner for my easel, and I'd paint beside her, her canvases bold, with a color mind sharp with feeling. She didn't coddle me, didn't let me hide. "You're ready for this, Lila," she said one afternoon, her voice cutting through the hum of the fan. But ready doesn't mean comfortable, it means you show up even when it scares you. I knotted my throat tight because she was right. It scared me, the idea of my work on gallery walls, of strangers seeing the raw edges of my soul. But it also thrilled me, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you could fly. The coffee shop was still my anchor, but even there the air felt different. Amara had started a running joke calling me Savannah's next big thing, and the regulars picked it up, asking about the gallery show with a mix of curiosity and pride. Claire, the gallery assistant, came by one morning. Her presence a reminder that this was real. She'd brought a curator, a woman named Rachel, with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity, to see my sketchbook. I showed them the river painting still unfinished, and Rachel studied it for a long time, her silence making my palms sweat. "There's a story here," she finally said. "It's personal, but it's universal. Keep going." I mumbled a thank you, my face burning, but inside I was soaring. They saw me, not just my art, but me. That validation was a spark, igniting something I hadn't let myself feel: ambition. I started dreaming bigger, not just about the group show, but about what could come after. I spent my breaks researching art grants, residencies, even graduate programs in art history. Things I'd once dismissed as impossible. I wasn't ready to quit. The coffee shop bills were still bills, but I was making plans, sketching a future that felt like mine. I bought a cheap laptop and started a portfolio website, uploading photos of my work, writing an artist statement that felt like a love letter to myself. My art is about survival. I wrote about finding light in the shadows, about claiming a voice when the world tells you to be silent. Reading it back, I realized it was true, and it made me stand taller. The change wasn't just internal. People noticed. Amara said I walked differently, like I was carrying less weight. Customers commented on my smile, how it reached my eyes now. Even Ms. Delgado remarked on it one evening as we sipped tea in her studio, the air smelling of linseed oil and jasmine. "You're not just surviving anymore," she said, her eyes crinkling. "You're thriving." I wanted to argue, to say I was still angry, still broken in places, but I couldn't. She was right. The pain was still there, a quiet hum beneath my skin, but it wasn't driving me anymore. I was driving myself. I hadn't spoken to Marcus or Sophie in weeks. Marcus had called once, leaving a voicemail about the house's sale, his tone impatient, like I was an obligation he wanted to check off. I didn't call back. Sophie texted a long message about missing me, about wanting to make things right, but it felt like too much too late. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I didn't need their validation anymore. I was building a life that didn't hinge on their approval, on my mother's love, on a family that had never known how to hold me. It hurt letting them go, but it also freed me like cutting a rope that had been pulling me under. The gallery show was at a small but respected space on Bull Street, its white walls and polished floors a world away from the community center. I helped hang my pieces the day before, my hands trembling. As I adjusted the frames, the lights casting my work in a glow that made it look like it belonged. Claire was there, efficient and kind, and she introduced me to the other artists, 2 painters and a sculptor. All older, all with resumes that intimidated me. But when they looked at my work, they didn't see a barista or a rejected daughter. They saw an artist, and their nods of respect were a currency I'd never known. The opening night was a blur of faces and voices, the gallery packed with people, sipping wine and murmuring about composition and intent. I wore a black dress I'd found at a thrift store, my hair pulled back, my nerves a live wire. Amara was there, her laughter a beacon, and Ms. Delgado stood quietly by my pieces, her presence a steadying force. I moved through the crowd, answering questions about my work, each conversation a small victory. A local critic, a man with a notebook and a serious expression, spent a long time in front of my triptych jotting notes. Later, he found me saying my work had emotional depth and raw potential words that felt like medals I'd carry forever. Then came the moment that changed everything. Rachel, the curator, pulled me aside, her voice low amid the crowd's hum. "We've had interest in your pieces," she said. "A collector wants to buy the river painting, and another asked about commissioning a piece. I'd also like you to consider a solo show next year. Your work, it resonates." I stared at her, my mind struggling to keep up, and managed a nod. My heart pounding so loud I thought she'd hear it. A sale, a commission, a solo show. It was more than I dared to imagine, a door swinging open to a world I'd thought was locked. I found Amara after my hands shaking as I told her, and she pulled me into a hug, her voice loud with pride. "This is you, Lila. This is what you're meant for." Ms. Delgado overheard her smile, rare and warm, and she raised her glass, a silent toast. I felt like I was floating, like the girl who'd sat on a park bench, months ago broken by her mother's will, was a memory, not a truth. I was still her in parts, but I was also this Lila, the artist, Lila, the survivor, Lila, the woman who was writing her own story. The show ended late, and I walked home through the Savannah squares, the air soft with the scent of magnolias, the stars bright above. I thought about my mother, not with the old anger, but with a quiet sorrow, a wish that she could have seen me. I didn't need her approval anymore, but I wanted her to know I was okay, that I was more than her silence. I stopped by the river, its waters dark and gleaming, and I made a promise to myself I'd keep going, keep creating, keep claiming my place, no matter what came next. The next day I got a call from Claire, confirming the sale of the river painting and the commission details. I quit one of my coffee shop shifts, just one, to make time for painting a small but seismic shift. I was still afraid of failing, of losing this momentum, but I was also ready to step into the unknown, to trust the strength I'd found. Have you ever stood at that threshold where the past is still heavy, but the future is yours to shape? That's where I was, my sketchbook in my bag, the river at my back, a fire in my chest that no one could extinguish. The commission was a lifeline, a bridge between the life I'd known and the one I was building. It came from a woman named Evelyn, a retired professor, who'd seen my river painting at the gallery show and wanted something for her home in Charleston, a piece about memory. She said something that felt like Savannah but carried the weight of time. I'd never done a commission before, never had someone trust me to translate their story into art, and the responsibility thrilled me as much as it terrified me. I'd sit in my apartment, the late summer light, slanting through the window, and sketch ideas, my table, a mess of charcoal and half-finished cups of tea. Each line was a choice, a step toward a future I was starting to believe. in a future where I wasn't defined by my mother's will or my siblings' shadows. Ms. Delgado was my anchor, her studio a place where I could wrestle with doubt and come out stronger. She'd watch me work her eyes sharp but kind, offering suggestions that pushed me to dig deeper. "You're not just painting for Evelyn," she said one evening, as we mixed colors under the studio's skylight, the air thick with turpentine. "You're painting for you. Every piece is a piece of your truth." I nodded my brush, moving, and I felt it. The truth of who I was, not just the pain of my mother's rejection, but the strength I'd found, the voice I was claiming. Ms. Delgado wasn't just teaching me art, she was teaching me how to be whole. The coffee shop was still part of my life, but it felt smaller now, like a chapter I was ready to close. I'd cut back to 3 shifts a week, enough to cover rent, while I worked on the commission and prepared for the solo show Rachel had promised. Amara was my cheerleader, her pride a warmth I carried with me. "You're out here living the dream," she'd say, grinning as we wiped down the espresso machine. And I'd laugh because it didn't feel like a dream yet, but it was closer than I'd ever been. Customers started recognizing my name, some from the gallery show, others from a small write-up in the local paper about Savannah's emerging artists. The attention was strange, like wearing a dress that didn't quite fit, but it also made me stand taller, made me feel like I belonged. The commission took shape over weeks, a large canvas that captured the Savannah River at dusk, its waters reflecting a sky heavy with memory. I wove in details Evelyn had shared. Her childhood in Savannah, her mother's garden, the oak tree where she'd read as a girl, and my own story, the loss and resilience I'd carried since the will. When I delivered it to Charleston, driving up in my rattling old car, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "This is more than I asked for," she said, her hands tracing the frame. "This is alive." She paid me more than we'd agreed, a check that felt like a vote of confidence, and asked to stay in touch. I drove back to Savannah, the highway stretching out like a promise. My heart so full it hurt. That payment changed things. I opened a savings account, my first, and started planning for a studio space. Nothing fancy, just a room where I could work without tripping over my couch. I applied for an artist grant I'd found online, a competitive one for Southern women in the arts, and spent hours on the application writing about my journey about art as survival. About the women, like Ms. Delgado and Amara, who'd helped me see my worth. When the acceptance letter came, offering a modest but meaningful stipend, I sat on my apartment floor, the paper in my hands, and cried not from sadness, but from a joy so fierce it felt like fire. The grant wasn't just money, it was proof I was doing this, proof I was enough. My status was shifting, not just in my own eyes, but in the world's. Claire, the gallery assistant, invited me to speak at a local art panel, a discussion about emerging artists at a community arts festival. I was terrified, my voice shaky, as I stood at the podium, but I talked about my work, about finding a voice through pain, about art as a way to heal. The audience listened, their faces open, and afterward a young woman approached me, her eyes bright with tears. "Your story, it's mine too," she said, telling me about her own family, her own invisibility. I hugged her, my heart aching and full, and realized I wasn't just making art anymore. I was making a difference. Miss Delgado was there for the panel, her nod from the back row, a quiet affirmation. Later, she pulled me aside, her voice low. "You're not just an artist now, Lila. You're a leader. Don't shy away from that." Her words stayed with me, reshaping how I saw myself. I wasn't just the girl who'd been left out of a will. I was someone who could inspire, who could create space for others. I started volunteering at the community center, teaching a weekly art class for teens, showing them how to draw their stories, their struggles. Watching them open up their pencils, moving with tentative courage, felt like seeing myself a year ago, and it made me want to keep going, to be the person I'd needed then. I hadn't seen Marcus or Sophie in months. Marcus had stopped reaching out, his silence a relief, though it stung in quiet moments. Sophie sent a card, a handwritten note, saying she was proud of my art, that she wanted to come to my solo show. I read it, my fingers tracing her loopy handwriting, and felt a pang of something like love, but I didn't respond. I wasn't ready, not yet. I was building a life that didn't depend on their apologies, their presence, their validation. It was lonely sometimes, that independence, but it was also liberating, like shedding a skin that had never fit. The solo show was looming 6 months away, and Rachel was pushing me to create a cohesive series, something that told a story. I decided to focus on family, not the one I'd lost, but the one I was finding in myself, in my art, in the people who saw me. I painted late into the night, my apartment a riot of color, each canvas a piece of my truth. The river, my mother's hands, the oak tree from Forsyth Park, a self-portrait with eyes that burned. I was taking risks, using bolder colors, larger scales, and the work felt alive, like it was speaking back to me. One evening, as I painted, I got a call from a small art magazine asking for an interview about my journey. They'd seen the festival panel, read the grant announcement, and wanted to feature me as an up-and-coming artist. I agreed, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach, and the interview was published a week later with a photo of me in Ms. Delgado's studio, my hands smudged with paint. Amara bought 10 copies, handing them out at the coffee shop, and Ms. Delgado framed one for her studio wall. Reading my own words, seeing my name in print, felt like a mirror showing me a woman I was proud to be. I quit another coffee shop shift, leaving just one a week, and rented a tiny studio space downtown, a former storage room with good light and creaky floors. It was mine, paid for with the commission and the grant, and I cried the first time I set up my easel. The space a symbol of everything I'd fought for. I was still scared of failing, scared of the weight of expectation, but I was also sure of my art, sure of my path, sure of the woman I was becoming. One night, as I walked home from the studio, the Savannah air soft with the first hint of fall, I passed the gallery on Bull Street, its windows dark but promising. I thought of my mother, not with the old bitterness, but with a quiet wish that she could see this, see the daughter she'd missed. I didn't need her love to keep going, but I wanted her to know I was thriving, that her silence hadn't broken me. I stood there, the stars above me, and felt a strength that was all my own, a strength that would carry me further than I'd ever imagined. Have you ever felt that certainty, that moment, when you know you're not just surviving, but soaring no matter what the world took away? That's where I was, my heart full, my future bright, my story mine to tell. The solo show was a month away, but the buzz around it was already louder than I'd expected. A hum that followed me through Savannah's cobblestone streets. I'd wake up in my new studio, the morning light spilling across my canvases, and feel a mix of terror and exhilaration, like I was riding a wave I couldn't see the end of. The series I'd created, 10 paintings each. A piece of my story, from my mother's absence to the strength I'd found, was almost complete, and every stroke felt like a vow, a promise to myself that I'd never let anyone make me small again. I was still the girl who'd been left out of a will, but I was also Lila Bennett, the artist, the woman whose name was starting to mean something in a city that had once overlooked her. Ms. Delgado was my rock, her studio, a place where I could refine my work and my courage. She'd sit with me, her own canvas half finished, and talk about the business of art, pricing, networking, handling criticism. "You're not just showing paintings," she said one afternoon, her voice steady as we adjusted a frame. "You're showing who you are. That's what they'll remember." I nodded, my hands smudged with paint, and felt the weight of it, the responsibility of standing in my truth, of letting the world see the scars and the light I'd made from them. The gallery, a sleek space on Bull Street, was promoting the show with a vigor that made my head spin. Claire, the assistant, had posters up across town, my name in bold alongside words like raw and revelatory. The local paper ran another piece, this one longer, with a photo of me in my studio. My eyes fierce, my hands holding a brush. Amara framed it and hung it behind the coffee shop counter, where I was down to 1 shift a week, a job I kept more for her than for necessity. Customers would point to the article, whisper my name, and I'd smile, still unused to the attention, but learning to carry it like a coat that was finally mine. The grant money and the commission had given me breathing room, but the real shift was in how I saw myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building, creating, claiming space. I'd started a blog to go with my portfolio writing about art and resilience, and it was gaining traction with comments from strangers who saw their own stories in mine. I was invited to give a guest lecture at a local college, a talk about art as healing. And though my knees shook as I stood at the lectern, the students' faces open, eager, made me feel like I was giving them something real, something I'd fought for. I hadn't heard from Marcus in weeks, his silence a wall I no longer tried to climb. Sophie had sent another text saying she'd seen the article, that she was coming to the solo show, that she wanted to talk. I read it, my heart twisting, but I didn't reply. I wasn't angry anymore, not exactly, but I was done waiting for them to see me. I was seeing myself, and that was enough. Still, the thought of them at the show, standing in front of my work, made my stomach churn. I didn't know what I wanted from them, regret, pride, and apology, but I knew I didn't need it to keep going. The night of the solo show arrived, a warm September evening, the air soft with the scent of jasmine. The gallery was transformed, my paintings lining the walls, each one lit to glow like a memory. I wore a deep green dress, chosen for the way it made me feel bold, and stood by the entrance, my heart a drumbeat as people arrived. Amara was there, her laughter a lifeline, and Ms. Delgado, her presence a quiet strength. The crowd was bigger than I'd imagined, artists, collectors, locals, even a few faces from the college lecture. Rachel, the curator, moved through the room, her smile a signal that this was a success, and Claire whispered that a critic from Atlanta was there taking notes. I gave a short talk, my voice steadier than I felt, about this series about art as a way to rebuild, to claim a voice. The audience listened, their silence a gift, and when I finished, the applause was warm, real, a sound I'd carry forever. I mingled after answering questions, hearing stories from strangers who saw their own pain in my work, their own triumphs. It was overwhelming, humbling, and I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, like every step, every tear, every sketch had led me here. Then I saw them, Marcus and Sophie, standing by the triptych of my mother's hands, their faces unreadable. Marcus looked older, his jaw tight, his suit crisp, but his eyes uncertain. Sophie was clutching a purse. Her cheeks flushed her gaze, darting from the painting to me. I froze my breath, catching the room's hum, fading to a dull roar. Amara was beside me, her hand on my arm, whispering, "You've got this," but I wasn't sure I did. They hadn't told me they were coming, hadn't reached out beyond Sophie's text, and their presence felt like an intrusion, a crack in the world I'd built. I walked over my legs, unsteady, the crowd parting as if sensing the weight of the moment. Marcus spoke first, his voice low, almost formal. "Lila, this is incredible." Sophie nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "I didn't know you could do this," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so proud." I stood there waiting for the warmth their words should have brought, but all I felt was a hollow ache, a reminder of the years they'd looked past me, the will that had made it official. I wanted to ask why they were here, what they wanted, but before I could, Marcus cleared his throat, his face tight with something like shame. "We didn't know," he said, his eyes on the floor. "About Mom, about the will. We didn't ask for it to be like that. I'm sorry, Lila. I should have fought for you." Sophie was crying now, her words tumbling out. "I was so caught up in my own stuff, I didn't see how much you were hurting. I should have been there. I'm so sorry." Their apologies hung in the air, heavy, sincere, but they didn't fix the past. They didn't erase the nights I'd cried alone, the years I'd felt invisible. I looked at them, my brother and sister, and saw strangers who shared my blood. Strangers who were finally seeing me, but only because I'd made myself impossible to ignore. I could have lashed out, could have thrown their absence back in their faces, but I didn't. I was done with that anger, done letting it define me. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm, steady. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me." Marcus flinched, his eyes meeting mine, and Sophie reached for my hand, but I stepped back, my heart racing but sure. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it, not for them, but for myself, to let go of the weight I'd carried too long. "But I don't need you to be proud. I'm proud of myself." The room seemed to hold its breath, the crowd's murmur a distant hum. Marcus nodded, his face crumpling, and Sophie wiped her eyes, her lips trembling. They didn't argue, didn't push, and when they left, slipping out into the night, I felt a release, like a knot in my chest had come undone. Amara hugged me, her voice fierce. "That was you, Lila. That was all you." Ms. Delgado was watching her nod, a quiet triumph, and I knew she understood this wasn't just a moment, but a turning point, a reclaiming of my story. The rest of the night was a blur of joy and connection, my paintings glowing, my heart full. The Atlanta critic wrote a review calling my work a testament to resilience, and 2 more pieces sold the money, a promise of more time to create. I stood in the gallery surrounded by people who saw me and felt a strength. I'd earned a strength no one could take away. Have you ever faced the people who broke you and realized you're stronger than their mistakes? That's where I was. The gallery lights warm my past behind me, my future a canvas I was ready to paint. The weeks after the solo show felt like waking from a long, heavy dream, the kind where you're running, but never sure where you're going. I'd walk to my studio each morning, the Savannah air crisp with the first whispers of fall, and feel a quiet certainty, like I'd finally found my place in the world. My paintings were still up at the gallery, 2 more sold, and the commission requests kept coming, each one a vote of confidence in the artist I'd become. I was no longer the barista scraping by, though I still worked 1 shift at the coffee shop, mostly to see Amara's smile and hear her tease me about being famous. I was Lila Bennett, the woman whose name was whispered in art circles, whose story was starting to ripple beyond Savannah. But even with the success, the applause, the checks that let me breathe easier, there was a question I couldn't shake. What did it mean to move forward when the past still lingered quiet, but stubborn in the corners of my heart? I hadn't spoken to Marcus or Sophie since the gallery, since that moment when I'd looked them in the eyes and chosen myself. Their apologies had been real, I knew that, but they were also a mirror, reflecting a history of absence I couldn't unsee. I'd forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to let go, to free myself from the weight of their choices, my mother's choices, the family that had never known how to hold me. Forgiveness wasn't a gift to them, it was a gift to me, a way to step into the life I was building without dragging their shadows behind. But forgiving didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean opening the door to a relationship I wasn't sure I wanted. I left Sophie's texts unanswered, let Marcus's calls go to voicemail, and focused on my work, my art, the truth I was still learning to tell. Ms. Delgado was my compass, her studio, a place where I could wrestle with these questions and come out clearer. She'd started calling me her protégé, a word that made me blush, but also made me stand taller. One afternoon, as we worked on new pieces, the air thick with the scent of oil paint, she handed me a book of poetry, its pages worn from years of reading. "Your mother loved Dickinson," she said, her voice soft, remembering the stories I'd shared. "But you're writing your own poems now, Lila. Don't let her story be the only one you tell." I took the book, my fingers tracing its cover, and felt a pang of gratitude for this woman who saw me, who'd helped me see myself. The ripple of my solo show kept spreading. A gallery in Atlanta invited me to show a piece in a regional exhibition, and a small art school asked me to teach. A summer workshop, a chance to share what I'd learned with students, like the teens I'd taught at the community center. I said yes to both, my voice steady my fear, no match for the fire inside me. I was still learning to trust this new life, to believe it wouldn't vanish, but each step, each painting, each class, each stranger who thanked me for my work made it more real. I was no longer the girl who'd sat on a park bench broken by a will. I was a woman who'd built something from the ruins, who'd found her worth in her own hands. Then came the letter. It was a Tuesday, the sky gray with the threat of rain, and I was in my studio sketching ideas for the Atlanta show. The mail carrier slipped a stack of envelopes through the slot, and among the bills and flyers was a small cream-colored envelope, its handwriting achingly familiar. My mother's. I stood there, the paper trembling in my hands, my heart a drumbeat I couldn't quiet. It was postmarked a week before she died, addressed to me in her careful slanted script, but I'd never seen it, never known it existed. I sat on the floor, the concrete cold beneath me, and opened it, my breath shallow, afraid of what it might hold. Inside was a single sheet, her words written in blue ink, the lines uneven from the tremor in her hand. My dearest Lila, it began, and I had to stop my eyes blurring because she'd never called me that, not in life, not in the hospital. She wrote that she was sorry, that she'd failed me, that the will was a mistake, born of fear and weakness. She'd wanted to protect Marcus and Sophie, she said, because she thought they needed it more, but she'd realized too late that I was the strongest, the one who'd carried her through her final days. She wrote that she'd always seen me, my art, my heart, even when she didn't know how to show it. She'd left something for me. She said something hidden in the house on Abercorn Street, in the attic under the floorboard by the window. "It's yours, Lila," she wrote. "You were always enough." I read it again, then again, the words, a knife and a balm cutting. Open the wound and soothing it at once. I wanted to be angry, to scream at her for waiting until it was too late, for leaving me to doubt her love. But I couldn't. All I felt was a deep, aching love, a sorrow for the mother who'd tried in her flawed way to say what mattered. I didn't go to the house that day or the next. I wasn't ready to face it, to search for whatever she'd left, to step back into a space that had once been home but now felt like a memory. Instead, I took the letter to my easel and painted a small canvas, just her handwriting. The words, "You were always enough," curling like a river across a sky of blue. It wasn't for a gallery, not for sale. It was for me, a way to hold her truth without letting it define me. I didn't tell Marcus or Sophie about the letter. It wasn't theirs to know, not yet, maybe not ever. I didn't need their permission to claim my mother's love, just as I didn't need their pride to claim my success. I was still open to them in a distant way, a door ajar, but not wide a space for a future I couldn't predict. But my life, my worth, didn't depend on them or on my mother's final words. It depended on me, on the art I made, the students I taught, the woman I saw in the mirror, her eyes bright with a fire no one could dim. I kept painting, teaching, writing, each act a step into a future I was shaping. The letter became a symbol, not of my mother's failure, but of my own resilience, a reminder that I'd found my way without it, that I'd built a life from the ashes of her silence. I hung the canvas of her words in my studio, a quiet presence like a star you see only when you're not looking. It wasn't the end of my story, but a turning point, a moment that let me release the last of the weight I'd carried. One evening as I walked home from the studio, the Savannah River glinting under the moon, I thought about the women who'd carried me here. Amara, Ms. Delgado, even my mother, in her imperfect way. I thought about the women who'd come to my shows, who'd read my blog, who'd told me their stories of being unseen, unchosen. I realized my art wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too, a bridge between our hearts. And I knew with a clarity that felt like grace that my worth had never depended on a will, a family, a name on a page. It was in me, in the work I did, the love I gave, the truth I told. So here I am standing in my studio, The world opened before me, a canvas waiting. I don't know what's next. More shows, more students, maybe even the attic on Abercorn Street when I'm ready. But I know this, you don't need someone else's validation to shine. Your worth is in you, in the choices you make, the dreams you chase, the heart you keep fighting for. Have you ever found that truth, that moment, when you know you're enough, no matter what anyone else says? That's where I am, my brush in hand. My mother's letter, a whisper my future, a song I'm writing. Note by note with every breath I take.